The watch on his workbench ticked with quiet precision, each movement an echo of dreams long abandoned. Outside, Maine winter pressed against weathered windows like an old enemy, patient and merciless. Jack Morrison's calloused fingers, once entrusted with spacecraft that touched the stars, now dismantled the second-hand Omega Speedmaster with surgical focus. 68 years had etched themselves into his face, but the eyes remained sharp, the eyes of an engineer who once spotted a fatal flaw that no one would believe. 20 years of exile in this frozen corner of nowhere, 20 years of silence. Then came the stranger who paid too much, the midnight intruder who shattered more than glass, and the business card bearing a senator's name. Suddenly, the past wasn't past anymore. Some secrets refuse to stay buried. Some wounds never heal. And sometimes, a man who has lost everything discovers he still has something left to fight for, even if it might cost what remains of his life. The first snow of November dusted the weathered sign of Morrison's auto like confectioner's sugar, accumulating in the rusted edges of letters that had faded through 20 Maine winters. Inside, Jack Morrison's gnarled fingers worked with surprising precision, dismantling the movement of a 1950s Bulova with the same methodical care he once applied to spacecraft components at NASA. At 68, Jack's face was a roadmap of wrinkles, each one earned through decades of squinting at technical schematics under fluorescent lights or staring into the heart of engines that refused to yield their secrets. His workshop smelled of motor oil, metal polish, and the coffee that perpetually brewed in an ancient percolator, the kind they didn't make anymore. Like most things Jack valued. "Damn government pension," he muttered, adjusting his bifocals as he extracted a tiny screw from the watch movement. "Wouldn't cover a rat's funeral these days." The radio crackled with the local weather report, another polar vortex making its way down from Canada, threatening to bury Pinewood in the worst winter since '98. Jack glanced up at the ceiling where water stains formed a Rorschach pattern of neglect. The roof wouldn't make it through another season. The bell above the shop door jingled, and Eleanor Caldwell swept in with the scent of cinnamon and fresh bread. At 60, Eleanor wore her silver hair in a practical bob, her eyes sharp behind tortoiseshell glasses. She owned the only decent cafe in Pinewood, a place where locals gathered more for her straight talk than her admittedly excellent pecan pie. "Brought you lunch," she announced, in placing a paper bag on his workbench. "And don't give me that 'I'm not hungry' nonsense. You're skinny as a rail. Jack Morrison." Jack grunted but couldn't hide the slight upturn of his lips. "Been busy. Busy watching that roof leak." Eleanor pointed at the bucket in the corner, collecting drops with a rhythmic ping. "You know, normal people retire to Florida. Only you would choose to freeze to death in Maine." "Florida's full of old people," Jack retorted, setting aside his watchmaker's loop. "And what do you think you are, exactly, a spring chicken?" Jack ignored the jab, instead nodding toward a wooden crate behind the counter. "Got something interesting at the Pembroke Estate auction yesterday. Outbid Hank Williams from the antique shop." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "The same Hank who called you a communist sympathizer at the town meeting last month." "The very same." Jack stood, his knees protesting with an audible crack. "Come see." He led Eleanor to the crate, removing layers of yellow newspaper to reveal his prize, an Omega Speedmaster Professional, its black face gleaming dully in the workshop's light. "It's just a watch," Eleanor said, unimpressed. Jack's eyes sparkled with rare animation. "Not just any watch. This is an Omega Speedmaster, the Moon Watch, identical to the ones worn by Apollo astronauts. This particular model looks like a '69 or early '70s. Eleanor picked it up gingerly. "Wasn't that your program, Apollo?" Jack nodded, a shadow crossing his face. "Different division, but yes, I worked on environmental systems, not flight hardware. Still." His fingers brushed the crystal reverently. "This was on someone's wrist while I was crunching numbers in Houston. How much did you pay for this trip down memory lane?" $200. Old Pembroke's kids didn't know what they had." Jack took the watch back. turning it over. Bit dinged up, but authentic. Worth at least $3,000. Maybe more to the right collector. Eleanor fixed him with the stare that had intimidated 3 generations of Pinewood residents. Then sell it. Jack, fix your damn roof before you drown in your own shop. It's a piece of history. It's a timepiece. And time is exactly what you're running out of. She pointed to the ceiling stain that had visibly expanded during their conversation. Listed on that eBay thing Robert tried to teach you to use. The mention of his son's name changed something in Jack's posture. He placed the watch back in its box with careful movements. "I'll think about it," he said, which was as close to agreement as Jack Morrison ever came. Eleanor seemed satisfied. "Eat your sandwich. I put extra roast beef in it." After she left, Jack sat at his computer, a decade-old desktop that wheezed with effort at each keystroke. His son Robert had set up an eBay account for him years ago, during one of his infrequent visits from Chicago. The password was taped to the monitor, NASA 1969. Robert's idea of a joke about his father living in the past. Jack photographed the Omega, carefully describing its condition and provenance. His fingers hesitated over the keyboard when setting the price. $3,000 seemed reasonable, but the roof repairs would cost closer to $5,000. Reluctantly, he typed $3,800 and hit list. By evening, the temperature had plummeted. Jack lived in the apartment above his shop, a Spartan space containing little more than a bed, a bookshelf full of technical manuals, and a television that received exactly 4 channels on good days. He nursed a glass of Jameson while watching the evening news. A notification pinged on his phone. Someone had purchased the watch at full asking price. No haggling. A rush of conflicting emotions swept through him, relief at the money, regret at parting with the timepiece, and surprise at the speed of the transaction. The buyer's message was brief. "I'll be in Pinewood tomorrow to collect it personally. Cash payment acceptable. David Harrington." Jack frowned. Most eBay transactions involve shipping, not personal collection. Something felt off, but the prospect of immediate cash for the roof repairs overrode his caution. He replied with the shop's address and business hours. Sleep came fitfully that night, his dreams filled with the rhythmic pinging of water droplets and the phantom sensation of a watch strapped to his wrist as he floated in the darkness of space. Morning brought a fresh dusting of snow and a call from Eleanor. "Heard you listed that watch," she said without preamble. Mabel from the post office saw it on her grandson's computer. Jack sipped his coffee. News travels fast. "It's Pinewood," Eleanor replied, as if that explained everything. "You get any bites? Sold already? Buyers coming today?" A pause. "That was quick." "Too quick." Jack voiced his unease. "Probably just some collector with too much money," Eleanor said, but her tone held a note of uncertainty. "Just be careful. I don't like strangers coming to your shop when you're alone." "I've been taking care of myself since before you moved to town." "Ellie." "Poorly," she retorted. "That's why I worry." Jack smiled despite himself. "I'll call you after." The morning passed with the routine maintenance jobs that kept Morrison's auto afloat: an oil change for Pastor Wilson's ancient Buick, a battery replacement for Sandra Milligan's Subaru. By noon, the snow had stopped, leaving Pinewood wrapped in a pristine blanket of white that belied the gray slush it would become by day's end. At precisely 2:17 p.m., a black Audi pulled into the gravel lot, its sleek lines and tinted windows as out of place in Pinewood as a penguin in the Sahara. Jack watched from behind the counter as a man emerged mid-40s, wearing a tailored overcoat that probably cost more than Jack's monthly income. He moved with the practiced confidence of someone accustomed to boardrooms, not small-town repair shops. "Mr. Morrison." The man extended a gloved hand. "David Harrington. We spoke about the Omega Speedmaster." Jack's calloused palm met the butter-soft leather of Harrington's glove. "You made good time. I was already in Portland for business." Harrington glanced around the shop, taking in the organized chaos of tools, parts, and the vintage clocks that lined one wall. "You have quite the collection." "Hobby," Jack said, reaching beneath the counter for the watch box. Gets my mind off carburetors and alternators. Harrington's eyes lit up when Jack opened the box, revealing the Speedmaster nestled on a bed of faded velvet. May I? Jack nodded, watching closely as Harrington examined the timepiece with the practiced eye of a connoisseur. His fingers moved over the case, checking for authenticity markers, noting the patina on the dial, testing the movement of the chronograph pushers. Beautiful piece, Harrington murmured. Reference 145-022-69, if I'm not mistaken. Post-moon landing, but still part of the Apollo era. Where did you acquire it? Estate sale, Jack replied, deliberately vague. Something about Harrington's intensity set off warning bells. Family didn't know what they had. Their loss, our gain. Harrington smiled, a practiced expression that didn't reach his eyes. I'm prepared to offer more than your asking price. The provenance and condition warrant it. Jack's suspicion deepened. Why? Harrington seemed taken aback by the bluntness. Excuse me, why pay more than asking? You already won the auction? A chuckle, too smooth to be genuine. I'm a collector, Mr. Morrison. This particular reference has eluded me for some time. Finding one in this condition, with its original box, he reached into his coat and withdrew an envelope. 15,000, cash. Jack stared at the envelope, then at Harrington. The listing was for 3,800. I'm aware. Harrington placed the envelope on the counter. Considerate appreciation for preserving a piece of American history. Something was definitely wrong. Nobody paid quadruple the asking price for a watch, even a desirable vintage piece. Jack's instinct, the same one that had once detected an oxygen system anomaly that others had missed, screamed danger. But the roof leaked, his heating bill had doubled, and Robert's son, Jack's grandson, whom he'd seen exactly twice, needed braces that insurance wouldn't fully cover. I don't suppose you'd tell me the real reason you want this watch so badly, Jack said, meeting Harrington's gaze directly. For an instant, something cold and calculating flashed in the younger man's eyes, quickly replaced by affable enthusiasm. I'm an Apollo program enthusiast. My father worked for NASA in the 60s administrative role. Nothing glamorous. This connects me to that legacy. It was plausible enough, but Jack didn't believe it for a second. Still, $15,000 would fix the roof with enough left over to help Robert with the braces. Maybe even fly out to Chicago for Christmas instead of spending it alone with a frozen dinner and memories. Cash verification first, Jack said, reaching for the counterfeit detection pen he kept for large transactions. Harrington nodded agreeably, watching as Jack tested several bills, all genuine. Jack counted methodically 15 stacks of $10, $100 bills each. Satisfied, Harrington asked. Jack closed the watch box and handed it over. Pleasure doing business. Harrington tucked the box into his coat pocket with surprising care. Thank you, Mr. Morrison. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. One more thing, the previous owner, the Pembroke estate, was it? Jack tensed. I don't recall mentioning any names. Must have been in the listing details, Harrington said smoothly. Senior moment on my part. Good day. Jack watched through the window as the Audi pulled away, its tires leaving twin tracks in the fresh snow. He locked the door, flipped the sign to closed, and immediately called Eleanor. He paid $15,000, Jack said when she answered. For a watch worth a quarter of that, a low whistle from Eleanor. Maybe he's one of those Silicon Valley types. More money than sense. He asked about where I got it, specifically mentioned the Pembroke estate, which I never told him. A pause. That's concerning. He knew the exact reference number too. 145 or 2269. Jack, you're speaking watch nerd. Translate. It means he knew exactly what he was looking for. This wasn't a random purchase. Jack paced the length of his shop, and he paid cash, $15,000 in hundreds. Did you call Robert? The question caught Jack off guard. Why would I call Robert? Because he's your son, and he's an investigative reporter. If something feels wrong, maybe he could run a background check on this Harrington person. Jack's jaw tightened. Robert's busy. It's probably nothing. Eleanor's sigh carried clearly through the phone. 20 years of estrangement is enough. Jack, use this as an excuse if you need one. It's not that simple. It never is with you two stubborn mules. Just be careful. Okay, lock your doors tonight. Jack promised he would, though Eleanor's concern struck him as excessive. What trouble could possibly come from selling a watch? Yet as he climbed the stairs to his apartment that evening, the cash heavy in his pocket, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd set something in motion, something beyond his understanding. He double-checked the locks, then settled into his armchair with a technical manual and another glass of Jameson. The television murmured in the background, local news giving way to national headlines. Jack was half dozing when a familiar name cut through his drowsiness. Growing concern for Senator William Blackwood, who has missed 3 scheduled appearances since Wednesday. The senator's office cites a severe case of influenza, but sources close to Blackwood say. Jack's eyes snapped open. William Blackwood, the name triggered memories from his NASA days, from the congressional hearings after the accident. Blackwood had been a junior congressman then, one of the few who'd actually listened during Jack's testimony instead of grandstanding for the cameras. The news showed a recent photo of Blackwood, now in his 70s but still commanding presence, with his shock of white hair and penetrating gaze. He served on the Senate Intelligence Committee, the anchor noted, and had recently been vocal about oversight of certain classified programs. Jack's unease deepened. Coincidences made him suspicious. They had no place in engineering or in life. He reached for his phone, hesitating only briefly before dialing Robert's number. It went to voicemail. Robert, it's your father. Something strange happened today. Probably nothing, but Jack paused, unsure how to continue without sounding paranoid. Call me when you can. He hung up, feeling foolish. His son wouldn't call back, he never did. Their relationship had fractured beyond repair after Jack's dismissal from NASA, the subsequent divorce from Robert's mother, and the years of bitterness that followed. Exhaustion finally claimed him around midnight, the television still flickering with late-night programming. He dreamed of Houston control rooms, of alarms blaring, of spacecraft spinning out of control while he watched helplessly from behind glass. The sound of breaking glass yanked him from sleep. Jack sat bolt upright, instantly alert despite the hour. Years of mission simulations and emergency drills had hardwired him to wake ready. Another crash from downstairs confirmed his fears someone was in the shop. Moving silently, Jack retrieved the Louisville Slugger he kept beside his bed, a remnant from Robert's Little League days. He crept down the stairs, avoiding the third step that always creaked, straining to hear over the pounding of his heart. Moonlight filtered through the shop windows, casting long shadows across the workbenches and tool cabinets. A figure moved near the counter where Jack had processed Harrington's payment. Rifling through drawers with practiced efficiency, Jack weighed his options. At 68, he wasn't winning any hand-to-hand confrontations. Calling the sheriff would take too long. Bill Thompson lived 10 miles out and moved with the urgency of a sedated turtle. The intruder straightened suddenly, turning toward the stairs. Jack froze, hidden in the shadows, calculating angles and distances. The figure moved closer, moonlight revealing a slim build clad entirely in black, face obscured by a balaclava. Jack waited until the intruder passed beneath the stairs, then moved. The baseball bat connected with a shelf of motor oil cans, sending them crashing to the floor. The intruder whirled, startled by the noise, giving Jack the moment he needed. He lunged, swinging the bat not at the intruder, but at the circuit breaker panel on the wall. Sparks flew as the ancient electrical system shorted out, plunging the shop into total darkness. This was Jack's domain. He knew every inch of the shop by touch, every tool's location, every obstacle. The intruder didn't. Jack ducked behind a workbench as the figure stumbled over a floor jack. Cursing softly, The voice was male, younger, professional, not the local meth heads who occasionally broke into businesses looking for cash. "I know you're there. Morrison," the intruder called, voice steady despite the situation. "I just want to talk about the watch." Jack remained silent, circling behind a stack of tires. "The senator's life depends on what was in that watch," the man continued. "If you know anything." Jack struck, swinging the bat at the intruder's knees. The man dodged with surprising agility, grabbing the bat's end and yanking. Jack, prepared for the counter, released the bat and drove his shoulder into the man's midsection. They crashed into a tool cabinet, wrenches and screwdrivers raining down. Despite his age, Jack had the advantage of familiarity and desperation. They grappled in the darkness, rolling across the shop floor. The intruder was trained, his movements had the practiced efficiency of military or law enforcement. Jack was outmatched in skill and strength, but he'd spent 40 years working with machines, developing a grip that could bend metal. When he locked his hands around the intruder's wrist, the man gasped in pain. "Who sent you?" Jack demanded, leveraging his weight to pin the younger man. Instead of answering, the intruder twisted, breaking Jack's hull with a technique that spoke of formal training. A fist connected with Jack's ribs, driving the air from his lungs. He rolled away, gasping, as the man scrambled to his feet. Headlights swept across the shop as a car passed on the street outside. In the momentary illumination, Jack caught a glimpse of the intruder reaching into his jacket. Instinctively, Jack grabbed the nearest object, a heavy crescent wrench, and hurled it. The wrench struck the intruder's arm just as he withdrew what looked like a small pistol. The weapon clattered to the floor, skidding under a workbench. With a curse, the man abandoned it, diving through the broken window he'd used to enter. Jack staggered to his feet, clutching his ribs, and flipped on his phone's flashlight. The shop was in disarray, tools scattered, oil pooling on the concrete floor. Where the intruder had stood, a small white rectangle caught the light of a business card. Jack picked it up, squinting at the embossed text office of Senator William Blackwood Committee on Intelligence below that. A handwritten note. "The watch is the key. B is in danger. Call this number only from a secure line." A series of digits followed, not a standard phone number. Jack stared at the card, his earlier unease crystallizing into something approaching dread. The watch he'd sold to Harrington was somehow connected to Senator Blackwood's disappearance. But how and why would anyone think Jack knew anything beyond its mechanical components? He searched for the intruder's abandoned weapon, finding it beneath the workbench. It wasn't a pistol, but a taser military grade, not the civilian version. Whoever had broken in wanted information, not blood. Jack's phone rang, startling him. Eleanor's name flashed on the screen. "Jack, are you okay, Mrs. Peterson across the street called me. She saw someone running from your shop in a broken window." "I'm fine," Jack said automatically, though his ribs protested the description. "Someone broke in. Gone now. I'm calling the sheriff." "No," Jack interrupted. "No police. Not yet." A pause. "Jack Morrison, what have you gotten yourself into?" He stared at the business card in his hand. "I'm not sure, but I think it involves Senator Blackwood." "The missing Senator Jack. That's crazy." "I know." He took a deep breath, wincing at the pain. "But the guy who broke in left a card from Blackwood's office. Said the watch is the key, whatever that means." "I'm coming over," Eleanor declared. "Don't argue, and don't touch anything else until I get there." She hung up before he could protest. Jack sank onto a stool, suddenly aware of every one of his 68 years. The adrenaline was fading, leaving him shaky and sore. He looked around his violated shop, at the chaos of his simple life upended, and wondered what exactly had been hidden in that Omega Speedmaster that was worth $15,000 in a midnight break-in. Eleanor arrived in record time, still wearing her nightgown under a heavy coat, hair askew. She surveyed the damage with narrow eyes, then focused on Jack with the same critical assessment. "You're hurt. Bruised ribs. Maybe. Nothing broken." Jack handed her the business card. Look at this! Eleanor studied it under the light of her phone, her expression unreadable. This number isn't formatted like a standard phone line. I noticed that too. Some kind of code. Maybe. She returned the card, her movements suddenly precise, economical. Jack, this is way above our pay grade. We need to call the authorities. And tell them that I sold a watch to a man who paid too much. Then someone who might work for a missing senator broke into my shop. Jack shook his head. They'll think I'm a senile old man. Then call Robert. Jack's jaw tightened. He won't answer. Then I'll call him, Eleanor said firmly. This is serious. Jack, if there's even a remote connection between that watch and Senator Blackwood, you could be in danger. Before Jack could argue further, headlights swept across the shop again. This time, the vehicle slowed, then stopped. Car doors opened and closed. Were you followed? Jack whispered, moving toward the broken window. Eleanor shook her head, suddenly alert in a way that struck Jack as incongruous. She moved with the same quiet efficiency as the intruder had, positioning herself where she could see the door while remaining hidden. Heavy footsteps approached, a sharp knock. Mr. Morrison Sheriff Thompson, the familiar drawl of Pinewood's law enforcement official filtered through the door. Got a report of a break-in. Jack exchanged a glance with Eleanor, who shook her head slightly, a warning. Something wasn't right. Sheriff Thompson never responded this quickly to anything, especially not at 3 a.m. Just a minute, Jack called, stalling. He gestured for Eleanor to hide, then grabbed a heavy wrench before approaching the door. Who reported it? A pause. Anonymous tip. You going to open up, or do I need to cite you for obstruction? That didn't sound like Thompson at all. Jack peered through the blinds, confirming his suspicion the cruiser outside wasn't from the Pinewood Sheriff's Department. It was similar, but the markings were wrong. My power's out, Jack replied. Circuit breaker blew. Let me find a flashlight. He retreated to where Eleanor had concealed herself behind a large tool cabinet. Not Thompson, he whispered. Fake cruiser. Eleanor's expression shifted to one of grim determination. Back door. Jack nodded, leading her through the darkened shop toward the rear exit that opened onto an alley. Behind them, the knocking grew more insistent. Morrison, open this door, or we're coming in. They slipped out the back just as the sound of splintering wood echoed from the front of the shop. The night air was bitter cold, their breath forming clouds in the moonlight. Jack's truck sat in the alley, covered in a thin layer of fresh snow. Keys, Eleanor whispered. Jack patted his pockets. Inside. Upstairs. Wonderful, Eleanor muttered. She glanced toward the street. We need to move. Now. They crept along the alley, keeping to the shadows. From the shop came the sounds of a thorough search drawers opening, furniture being moved, low voices conferring. Where are we going? Jack asked as they reached the end of the alley. Eleanor pointed to a blue Subaru parked half a block away. My car, and then we're getting out of Pinewood. What about the sheriff? The real one. Jack, if these people are impersonating law enforcement to search your shop, they're not going to be deterred by a small-town sheriff. She fixed him with a hard stare. We need to disappear until we figure out what's happening. The urgency in her voice brooked no argument. They reached the Subaru without incident, Eleanor unlocking it with a keyless remote. Jack slid into the passenger seat, wincing as his bruised ribs protested. Eleanor started the engine, pulling away from the curb with deliberate casualness. Keep your head down, she instructed, navigating Pinewood's deserted streets with the confidence of someone who'd done this before. Jack complied, but his mind raced with questions. How do you know how to do this? Eleanor's eyes remained fixed on the road. Do what? Evade, hide, move like... He trailed off, struggling to articulate what he'd observed. Like someone with training. Eleanor supplied, a hint of resignation in her voice. Because I have it. Jack stared at her profile, illuminated intermittently by passing streetlights. Eleanor Caldwell, who baked the best pecan pie in 3 counties, who organized the town's Christmas food drive, who fussed over his eating habits like a mother hen. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. Eleanor sighed, checking the rearview mirror before answering. "I was CIA, Analysis Division, Near East Section, retired 15 years ago." Jack absorbed this revelation in stunned silence as Eleanor guided the Subaru onto the highway leading out of Pinewood, accelerating into the night. "You're taking this awfully well," she remarked after several miles of silence. Jack snorted. "I'm compartmentalizing. It's what engineers do. I'll have my existential crisis about my friend's secret identity once we're not running from fake cops." That drew a small smile from Eleanor. "Fair enough. Were you ever going to tell me?" Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Honestly, no. That part of my life was over. I chose Pinewood because it was quiet, safe, as far from geopolitical hotspots as I could get. Then why reveal it now? Because that business card you showed me," Eleanor's voice was tight, "the number format is a CIA emergency contact protocol, specifically one used by deep cover assets when standard channels are compromised." Jack's blood ran cold. "You're saying Senator Blackwood is CIA?" "No, I'm saying someone in his office is using CIA protocols to reach out for help, and they think you have information they need." The highway stretched before them, empty in the pre-dawn darkness. Jack watched the mile markers flash by, each one taking them further from the simple life he'd built in Pinewood. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent 20 years hiding from his past, only to have it catch up to him through a second-hand watch. "Where are we going?" he finally asked. Eleanor checked the mirrors again, a habit Jack now recognized as professional vigilance rather than paranoia. "Somewhere safe. I have a cabin near Lake Sebago. Off-grid, difficult to find unless you know what you're looking for." "You have a bug-out location," Jack said, half accusatory. "All this time in Pinewood, you had an escape plan." "Old habits," Eleanor admitted. "The agency teaches you to prepare for contingencies, even ones that seem improbable. Like a retired NASA engineer accidentally selling a watch connected to a missing senator." "Exactly like that." Eleanor turned onto a smaller road, the Subaru's headlights illuminating a canopy of pine trees. "Get some rest, Jack. We've got a long drive ahead, and when we reach the cabin, we need to figure out what was so special about that watch." Jack leaned back, his mind whirling with the day's revelations. From the Omega Speedmaster to Harrington's mysterious overpayment, from the midnight intruder to Eleanor's secret past, his world had shifted on its axis in less than 24 hours. As the first hint of dawn colored the eastern sky, Jack Morrison watched his ordinary life recede in the rearview mirror, replaced by a mystery that stretched all the way to the highest levels of government. Whatever had been hidden in that watch, it was valuable enough to kill for, and now he was caught in the middle, with only a retired CIA analyst and his own fading skills to keep him alive. The road wound deeper into the Maine wilderness, carrying them toward answers and almost certainly more danger. Eleanor's cabin was exactly what Jack expected from a CIA safe house disguised as a vacation property, remote but accessible, defensible without appearing fortified, and equipped with everything needed for extended isolation. Solar panels on the roof, a propane generator as backup, satellite internet disguised as standard TV equipment, and enough non-perishable food to last weeks. "Home sweet home," Eleanor said as she unlocked the door. "At least temporarily." Jack surveyed the one-room structure with professional appreciation. "Nice setup. Very prepared. I told you contingencies." She gestured toward a small bathroom. "Get cleaned up. First aid kit's under the sink. I'll secure the perimeter." Jack didn't argue, his ribs throbbing with each breath. In the bathroom mirror, he assessed the damage, an impressive array of bruises blossoming across his torso. A cut above his left eye he hadn't noticed in the chaos, and a general look of exhaustion that aging had only intensified. The first aid kit was comprehensive enough for field surgery. Jack cleaned the cut, then wrapped his ribs with practiced movements. NASA's survival training had included basic medical care another lifetime ago, but the skills remained. When he emerged, Eleanor was at a laptop, typing rapidly. "I'm checking news sources for anything about Blackwood," she explained without looking up. "Also running that business card number through some old channels. If it's an active protocol, someone might respond." Jack settled into a chair by the wood stove. "Shouldn't we be contacting the FBI or something? If Blackwood is really missing, we don't know who we can trust." Eleanor interrupted. "The intruder had tactical training. The fake police had convincing credentials. This is a sophisticated operation. Jack, until we know more, we assume everyone is compromised." Cheerful outlook. Realistic one. Eleanor closed the laptop. "News is reporting Blackwood has the flu, but no one's actually seen him in 4 days. His security detail is being unusually tight-lipped." Jack rubbed his temples. "And all this started with a damn watch. Tell me everything again, from the beginning. Every detail about the watch, the auction, Harrington, everything." Jack recounted the story, this time including nuances he'd overlooked earlier, how Harrington had examined the watch with expert precision, his specific interest in its provenance, the slight tension in his posture when Jack questioned the excessive payment. He knew exactly what he was looking for. Jack concluded, this wasn't a collector's impulse buy. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "What about the Pembroke estate? Anything unusual there?" "Edgar Pembroke was just a local doctor. Lived in that big house on Maple Street for 40 years. Died last month, natural causes, according to town gossip. His kids live out of state. Hired an auction company to liquidate the estate." "A doctor," Eleanor mused, "with access to patient information, medical supplies. You think this is about drugs blackmail?" "I think it could be about anything, but there must be a connection between Pembroke, that watch, and Senator Blackwood." Eleanor stood, pacing the small cabin. "The watch is the key. According to our midnight visitor, what could be hidden in a watch?" Jack considered the question from an engineer's perspective. Not much physically. The movement's too precise, any foreign object would disrupt it. Maybe information's serial numbers can be significant. Or it could be symbolic, Eleanor suggested. A signal, a recognition marker. A thought struck Jack. When I opened it to check the movement, there was a small mark on the inside of the case back. I assumed it was a service mark from a watchmaker, but it looked hand-etched, not stamped. Eleanor leaned forward. What kind of mark? Just a symbol, like an hourglass on its side infinity sign, maybe with a dot in each loop. The color drained from Eleanor's face. "Are you absolutely certain?" Jack frowned at her reaction. "Yes." "Why?" Instead of answering. Eleanor moved to a bookshelf, removing several volumes to reveal a hidden safe. She dialed the combination with practiced ease, extracting a folder with no markings. In 1968, the agency established a special communications protocol for assets operating in denied areas, she explained, leafing through the folder. It used everyday objects as carriers for microdots, information reduced to microscopic size and hidden in plain sight. Like watches, exactly like watches. Each asset had a specific recognition symbol to identify their communications. She found what she was looking for, sliding a page across to Jack. "Is this what you saw?" The page showed various small symbols, each with a code designation. Halfway down was the infinity sign with dots that Jack had described, labeled Helios. "That's it," Jack confirmed. "What's Helios?" Eleanor closed the folder. "That's the problem. I don't know, and this information is decades old, from when I was junior staff. Helios wasn't my operation, it was above my clearance level. But it was CIA, or adjacent to it." Eleanor looked troubled. "Jack, if that watch contained a Helios microdot, and if that microdot is somehow connected to Senator Blackwood's disappearance, then we're in the middle of something big," Jack finished. "Something bigger than a small-town break-in." The cabin's satellite phone rang, startling them both. Eleanor approached it cautiously, checking the incoming number display. Unknown, she said. Could be a response to the card protocol. Jack tensed. Or a trace. Eleanor nodded, lifting the receiver. Hello. The voice on the other end was deep, male, and unfamiliar. Is this Eleanor Caldwell, formerly of Analysis Division? Eleanor's expression remained neutral. Who's asking? Someone who knows about Helios. Someone who knows Jack Morrison has information vital to national security. A pause. Someone who can help you both stay alive. I'm listening, Eleanor said carefully. Blackwood isn't missing, he's hiding. Because he discovered something about Helios that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. The man's voice lowered. The watch was his insurance policy. Now Harrington has it, which means we're running out of time. Who are you? Eleanor demanded. A friend of Blackwood's, and potentially yours, if you're willing to help. The man sounded tired. I'm sending coordinates to this phone. Be there at noon tomorrow. Come alone, and make absolutely sure you're not followed. The line went dead. Moments later, the phone beeped with an incoming message, a set of GPS coordinates. Eleanor stared at the display. Well, that's ominous. Are we going? Jack asked. It could be a trap, or it could be our only lead. Jack stood, ignoring the protest from his ribs. I sold that watch. Whatever happens because of it is partly my responsibility. Eleanor studied him, a new respect in her gaze. You know, for someone who's spent 20 years hiding from the world, you're surprisingly eager to dive into a potential intelligence crisis. Jack shrugged. I'm not hiding anymore. Someone broke into my home, threatened me, and is apparently willing to commit multiple felonies over a watch I handled. At this point, I just want answers. Fair enough. Eleanor checked the coordinates on a map. It's an old fire lookout tower, about 3 hours from here. Remote, defensible, excellent visibility. She nodded appreciatively. Smart choice for a meeting. So we're going. We're going, Eleanor confirmed. But first, we need to be prepared for the worst-case scenario. She opened another cabinet, revealing what Jack immediately recognized as a gun safe. I'm assuming you remember how to handle a firearm. Jack thought of his military service, of the standard training all NASA personnel received. It's been a while, but yes. Good. Eleanor unlocked the safe, revealing a modest but well-maintained collection. Because whoever is hunting that watch isn't playing by small-town rules, and neither can we. As Eleanor checked and loaded a 9mm pistol with practiced efficiency, Jack wondered how he'd missed this side of her for all these years. The woman who baked pies and organized charity drives was also someone who maintained an off-grid safe house and a small arsenal. It was as if he'd been living next to a completely different person. Stop looking at me like that, Eleanor said without glancing up from the weapon. I'm still the same Eleanor who nags you about your cholesterol. Just with more guns, Jack observed dryly. A girl needs hobbies. She handed him the pistol. Now get some rest. Tomorrow, we find out what's worth killing for in that watch of yours. Rest proved elusive. Jack spent hours on the cabin's narrow cot, staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying the events of the past 24 hours. The Omega Speedmaster, Harrington's too-eager purchase, the midnight intruder, the infinity symbol with its ominous designation, Helios. Something nagged at him about that name, a half-remembered conversation from decades ago. Helios, the Greek sun god. There had been a project with that name during his NASA days, something classified, something adjacent to the Apollo program, but not directly part of it. Jack had been peripheral to whatever Helios was, focused on his own environmental systems work, but he remembered hushed conversations, special clearances, and a certain senator, then a young congressman asking pointed questions during closed-door hearings. Blackwood, the connection crystallized in Jack's mind. Blackwood had been investigating Helios back then, and apparently he'd never stopped. Dawn was breaking when Jack finally dozed off, his dreams filled with watches that ticked backward and men in shadows who spoke in code. He awoke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Eleanor speaking in low tones. For a moment, he thought she was on the phone, but when he entered the main room, he found her talking to a tall, lean man with salt and pepper hair, dressed in outdoor gear that had seen better days. "Jack," Eleanor said calmly, "this is Mike Sullivan. My contact from the agency." Mike extended a weathered hand. "Morrison. Been a long time." Jack frowned, studying the man's face. Recognition dawned slowly. "Sullivan from Houston. You were on the thermal team." A thin smile. "Good memory. I was wondering if you'd place me." "You two know each other." Eleanor looked between them, surprised. "NASA," Jack explained. "Mike worked on thermal protection systems for the command module. We weren't close, but we both got caught in the crossfire after Apollo 15. Mike finished. When things went sideways, the memory of congressional hearings, technical reviews, and career-ending accusations hung in the air between them. Jack had been pushed out of NASA for raising safety concerns that proved valid only after lives were lost. Mike, apparently, had found a different path. "You're CIA," Jack asked. "Was," Mike corrected. "Like Eleanor here. I'm officially retired. Unofficially," he shrugged. "Some retirements are more active than others." Eleanor handed Jack a mug of coffee. "Mike reached out after I pinged the emergency protocol. He was Blackwood's handler back in the day." "Handler?" Jack looked at Mike with new wariness. "Blackwood was an asset." "Not exactly." Mike settled into a chair, his movements betraying old injuries. "More like a friendly contact with shared interests. He was on the intelligence committee, needed reliable sources outside official channels. I provided insight, he provided oversight. And now he's missing," Jack said. "Not missing," Mike corrected. "In protective isolation. At least, he was until 3 days ago." Eleanor leaned forward. "What happened?" "Blackwood reached out to me last month. Said he'd found evidence that Helios was active again." Mike's expression darkened. "For those not familiar, Helios was a black program that ran adjacent to Apollo. Officially, it was researching solar energy collection for long-duration spaceflight. And unofficially," Jack prompted, "weaponizing solar radiation," Mike said bluntly. "Focusing it from orbit. The technology wasn't there in the 60s, but the theoretical work was sound. Blackwood shut it down when he discovered the real purpose, or thought he did." Jack's coffee turned bitter in his mouth. "And now it's back," Mike nodded grimly. "With modern technology, what was science fiction in 1969 is frighteningly possible today." Blackwood found a money trail leading to a new iteration of the program, operating under the Department of Energy, run by a man named Grant Harrison. "The Energy Secretary." Eleanor looked stunned. "He's been all over the news promoting his new solar initiative." "Exactly. Hiding in plain sight." Mike produced a small device from his pocket, a signal jammer. "What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this cabin." Blackwood gathered evidence, stored it on a microdot, and hid it in the one place no one would think to look a vintage watch identical to those worn during the original Helios program. "The Omega," Jack said, pieces falling into place. "But why put it up for auction? Why not keep it?" "Because someone was on to him. He needed the evidence in neutral hands until he could present it to the right authorities." Mike looked at Jack. He never expected it to end up with a former NASA engineer who worked adjacent to the original program. That was pure coincidence. Jack didn't believe in coincidences, but he kept that thought to himself. So now Harrington has the microdot, Blackwood is in hiding, and we're, expected to fix this somehow. We need to recover that microdot before Harrison's people can decode it. Without the evidence, we can't stop Helios. Mike checked his watch. "And we have less than 12 hours before the test firing." "Test firing," Eleanor's voice sharpened. "They're activating a solar weapon, a demonstration for military observers. Targeted heat pulse on an uninhabited island in the Pacific. Proof of concept?" Mike's expression was grim. But the system is untested, unpredictable. If the focusing mechanism fails, or if the energy yield is higher than calculated, thousands could die, Jack finished, the engineer in him immediately grasping the implications. Even a minor miscalculation could create a heat bloom affecting shipping lanes. Air traffic. Exactly. And we have no way to warn anyone without the evidence Blackwood gathered. Mike stood. We need to move. Harrington is taking the watch and the microdot to the test site today. Security will be impenetrable once he's inside the facility. Where is he now? Eleanor asked. Portland. Private airfield. His flight leaves in 3 hours. Jack exchanged a glance with Eleanor. You're suggesting we intercept him. 3 retirees against what I assume are professional security forces. Mike's smile held no humor. 4 retirees, actually. Blackwood will meet us there. Blackwood's alive. Eleanor looked skeptical. You're certain? I spoke to him this morning. He's been in a safe house near Portland, monitoring Harrison's operation. Mike gestured toward the door. We don't have time for debates. You coming or not? Jack thought of his quiet shop in Pinewood, of the roof that needed repairs, of the simple life he'd built to escape his past. Then he thought of what could happen if an orbital solar weapon misfired, or worse, worked exactly as designed, but in the wrong hands. I'm in, he said, surprising himself with his conviction. But I have one condition. Mike raised an eyebrow. Which is, when this is over, I want the truth about what happened with Apollo 15. All of it. Jack met the other man's gaze steadily. I lost my career, my marriage, my relationship with my son, all because I was the scapegoat for someone else's mistake. I want to know why. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Mike nodded. If we survive this, you'll get your answers. I promise. Eleanor checked her weapon one last time. Well, gentlemen, shall we go commit some light treason to save the world? As they loaded into Mike's nondescript SUV, Jack Morrison felt something he hadn't experienced in decades, the familiar tension before a mission, the focused clarity that came with purpose. For 20 years, he'd hidden from his past in a small Maine town, fixing engines instead of spacecraft. Now, improbably, that past had found him through a vintage watch with a secret, and just like the Apollo missions of his youth, failure wasn't an option. The drive to Portland passed in tense silence, broken only by Mike's occasional updates from his contacts tracking Harrington's movements. Jack spent the time reviewing everything he knew about the Omega Speedmaster, wondering if he'd missed any other clues during his brief ownership of the watch. Approaching the airfield, Mike announced as they turned onto a narrow road lined with bare trees. Remember the plan? We're aviation enthusiasts interested in Harrington's private jet. Eleanor, you're our distraction if needed. Jack, you stick with me. The Portland Executive Airport was modest by private aviation standards, a single runway, a small terminal, and a row of hangars for private aircraft. Mike parked in the visitor lot, positioning the SUV for a quick exit if necessary. Harrington's jet is in Hangar C, he said, checking his phone. Gulfstream G5R50, scheduled departure in 90 minutes. Security, Eleanor asked, adjusting her jacket to conceal her shoulder holster. Private, not TSA, 2 visible at the main entrance. Probably more inside. Mike handed Jack a pair of binoculars. Let's confirm our target is present. They walked casually toward an observation area near the terminal, maintaining the appearance of aviation enthusiasts. Jack scanned the tarmac, focusing on the hangar Mike had indicated. A sleek white jet sat outside, stairs deployed, ground crew performing pre-flight checks. Got him, Jack murmured as a familiar figure emerged from the terminal building. Harrington, with 2 escorts, Mike nodded. Right on schedule. He'll inspect the aircraft, then board. Our window is narrow. And Blackwood, Eleanor asked quietly, where's our backup? In position, Mike assured her. Trust me. Jack lowered the binoculars, an uneasy feeling settling in his gut. Something about the situation felt wrong, the timing too convenient. the security too light for someone transporting classified information. "Let's move," Mike said, steering them toward the terminal entrance. "Act natural. Stay together." The terminal was sparsely populated, a few pilots checking weather reports, ground staff moving between hangars, a bored-looking receptionist at the main desk. Mike approached her with a practiced smile. "Good morning. Good. We're with Eastern Aviation Magazine, here to photograph the Gulf Stream in Hangar C. Mr. Harrington is expecting us." The receptionist looked skeptical. "I don't have you on the schedule." "That's strange," Mike said, his confusion perfectly calibrated. "We confirmed yesterday. Perhaps you could call him David Harrington. He's very interested in having his aircraft featured in our executive fleet spread." As Mike engaged the receptionist, Jack scanned the terminal, noting the security cameras, exit routes, and the two guards stationed near the tarmac doors. Eleanor had drifted toward a coffee station, positioned to observe both the entrance and the hangar access point. Something caught Jack's attention, a reflection in the glass door leading to the tarmac. A face he recognized, watching their group with calculated interest. Not Harrington, but someone from Jack's shop the night before. One of the fake police officers. Jack tensed, catching Eleanor's eye and giving a subtle head tilt toward the door. She followed his gaze, her expression unchanging even as her posture shifted subtly into readiness. "Mr. Harrington says he knows nothing about an interview," the receptionist was saying, phone in hand. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Mike's friendly demeanor didn't waver. "Of course, simply a misunderstanding. We'll reschedule." He turned back toward Jack and Eleanor, voice dropping. "We've been made Plan B." Before Jack could ask what Plan B entailed, the terminal doors burst open. 4 men in tactical gear entered, weapons raised. "Federal agents, everyone down on the ground." Now the few civilians in the terminal dropped immediately, hands covering their heads. Jack froze, heart hammering. These weren't Harrison's private security. They moved with the practiced coordination of actual law enforcement. "FBI," Eleanor confirmed in a whisper. "Real ones." Mike cursed softly. Someone talked. "We need to." Michael Sullivan. One agent shouted. "Jack Morrison, Eleanor Caldwell. You are under arrest for conspiracy and attempted interference with a federal investigation. Get down on the ground. Hands behind your heads." Jack's world narrowed to the barrel of the weapon aimed at his chest. Slowly, he knelt, placing his hands behind his head as instructed. Beside him, Eleanor did the same, her expression a mask of calm resignation. Only Mike remained standing, hands raised non-threateningly. "Agent Reynolds," he said, addressing the lead FBI officer. "You're making a mistake. We're not the enemy here." The female Agent Reynolds kept her weapon trained on Mike. "Save it, Sullivan. We know about the microdot, the watch, all of it. Harrison's people are already in custody." Mike's composure faltered. "What? The real Senator Blackwood contacted us 3 days ago." Reynolds continued. "He's been working with a joint FBI-CIA task force investigating Project Helios for months. He was never missing. That was a cover story while we gathered evidence." Jack looked at Mike, whose expression had shifted from confident to calculating. "Mike, what's going on?" "The watch, Jack," Eleanor said quietly. "Ask him about the watch." Reynolds' gaze flicked to Eleanor. "Smart woman. Sullivan here never worked for Blackwood. He worked for Harrison. The watch didn't contain evidence against Helios. It contained the activation codes Harrison needed for today's demonstration." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. They'd been manipulated from the start not to prevent a disaster, but to facilitate one. "You son of a bitch," Jack breathed, staring at Mike. "You used me." Mike's facade cracked, a cold smile replacing the mask of concern. "You made it too easy, Morrison. So desperate for redemption, for answers about your past. The perfect mark. Down on the ground, Sullivan," Reynolds ordered. "Last warning." Instead of complying, Mike's hand moved with blinding speed toward his jacket. Jack reacted instinctively, diving sideways into Eleanor, knocking her flat as gunfire erupted in the small terminal. Mike staggered backward, red blooming across his chest, expression more surprised than pained. He collapsed to his knees, then fell forward onto the polished floor. The aftermath was chaos, agents securing the scene, civilians being evacuated, paramedics rushing in. Jack and Eleanor sat on a bench outside the terminal, shock blankets around their shoulders, giving statements to increasingly senior FBI officials. "Let me get this straight," said the latest, a stern woman in her 50s with the bearing of someone used to command. "You sold a watch to David Harrington, who works for Secretary Harrison, but the watch was planted by Sullivan, who also worked for Harrison, to manipulate you into helping them recover activation codes that Senator Blackwood had hidden." Jack nodded wearily. "Sullivan knew I'd worked adjacent to the original Helios program. He orchestrated everything: the break-in at my shop, the fake police, the safe house meeting. He needed someone Blackwood might trust to get close to the real watch. And the watch you sold to Harrington, a decoy Eleanor supplied. Sullivan probably had it made to match the description of Blackwood's watch. The real one is still out there, with the evidence against Harrison." The FBI agent Catherine Reynolds, she'd finally introduced herself, nodded thoughtfully. "That tracks with what we've pieced together. Blackwood suspected someone in his office was compromised, so he created a legend about hiding evidence in a watch. The leak made its way to Harrison, who dispatched Sullivan to recover it. Using me as his unwitting accomplice," Jack said bitterly. "Don't be too hard on yourself, Mr. Morrison. Sullivan was a master manipulator, 20 years with the agency, specialized in turning assets." Reynolds handed him a business card. "If you think of anything else, call me directly, and don't leave town." As Reynolds walked away, Jack turned to Eleanor. "I'm sorry I dragged you into this." "You didn't drag me anywhere," she replied firmly. "I chose to help a friend, and we did stop Sullivan from whatever he was planning." "By accident," Jack pointed out. "If the FBI hadn't been tracking him already. But they were, and we're alive, and Harrison's operation is being dismantled as we speak." Eleanor squeezed his shoulder. "That's a win in my book." Jack wasn't so sure. He felt used, foolish, a relic from another era who'd been easily manipulated by appeals to his past glory and lingering regrets. A black SUV pulled up to the terminal, and two agents escorted an elderly man toward the building. Even at a distance, Jack recognized the shock of white hair and commanding presence of Senator William Blackwood. "Is that—" Eleanor began. "Blackwood," Jack confirmed. "The real one. Apparently—" The senator paused, saying something to his escorts, then changed direction, approaching Jack and Eleanor with measured steps. Up close, his age was more apparent, deep lines carved into a face that had seen decades of Washington politics, but his eyes were sharp and evaluating. "Mr. Morrison," Blackwood said, extending a hand. "Senator William Blackwood. I understand you've had a rather eventful few days because of me." Jack shook the offered hand, noting the strength still present in the older man's grip. "Not sure eventful covers it. Senator." "No, I suppose not." Blackwood nodded to Eleanor. "Ms. Caldwell, the agency still speaks highly of your analytical work." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "I've been running a cafe in Maine for 15 years, and doing excellent work there too, from what I hear." Blackwood smiled briefly, then sobered. "I owe you both an explanation, and an apology, for using us as bait." Jack couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. "I never intended for civilians to be involved," Blackwood said firmly. "When I discovered Harrison was reviving Helios, not as a defensive system, but as a first-strike weapon, I needed to gather evidence carefully. I created a legend about hiding that evidence in a watch similar to those used in the original program." "To smoke out the leak in your office?" Eleanor surmised. "Precisely. Harrington took the bait, but I didn't anticipate Sullivan's involvement or his methods." Blackwood looked genuinely regretful. I certainly never expected him to target a former NASA engineer with connections to the original program. Jack processed this information slowly. So there never was a microdot in my watch. No, the real evidence was secured through conventional channels, financial records, witness testimony, intercepted communications. Blackwood glanced toward the agents waiting for him. I need to go. The Justice Department is preparing indictments against Harrison and several others. But I wanted to thank you both personally. Your involvement, however unintentional, helped expose a conspiracy that threatened national security. As the senator turned to leave, Jack called after him. Senator, the original Helios program was at weapons research from the beginning. Blackwood paused, considering his answer carefully. Not originally, no. It began as legitimate research into solar energy collection, but certain parties saw its potential for weaponization and diverted resources accordingly. His gaze met Jack's directly. People like you, who raised concerns about safety protocols being ignored, were seen as obstacles. People like me were fired, Jack said flatly, had their careers destroyed. Yes, Blackwood didn't flinch from the accusation. And that was wrong. For what it's worth, I've spent 40 years trying to ensure such abuses of power don't happen again. He handed Jack a small envelope. This won't undo the damage, but perhaps it will answer some questions. With that, Blackwood rejoined his escorts and disappeared into the terminal. Jack stared at the envelope, reluctant to open it. What do you think it is? Eleanor asked softly. Probably classified documents I'm not supposed to have. Jack muttered. More secrets. More half-truths. Only one way to find out. Jack sighed, then carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single page, a memo from 1972, declassified but heavily redacted. Even with the black bars obscuring much of the text, the content was clear, a recommendation that Engineer J. Morrison be reinstated with full clearance and back pay, noting that his safety concerns had been validated by subsequent review. At the bottom, in flowing script, was a handwritten note. This recommendation was buried by those who feared accountability. I've spent decades trying to make it right. The full file awaits you in Washington, if you want it. WB. Jack's hand trembled slightly as he refolded the paper. Jack, Eleanor's voice was gentle. What is it? Vindication, he said quietly. 40 years too late. They sat in silence as FBI agents swarmed the airfield, securing evidence and detaining suspects. The morning sun broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the tarmac. What now? Eleanor finally asked. Back to Pinewood, back to fixing engines and baking pies. Jack considered the question, feeling the weight of decades of isolation and bitterness lifting slightly. My shop's probably a crime scene. Roof still leaks. And I seem to be short one vintage Omega. True, Eleanor agreed. Although I suspect the FBI might help with the damages, given the circumstances. Maybe, Jack tucked Blackwood's note carefully into his pocket. But before that, I think I have a trip to make. Washington? Chicago? Jack's gaze turned distant. I need to see my son. Tell him what really happened. Why I left NASA. Why his mother and I. He trailed off, then straightened his shoulders. It's time. Eleanor smiled, a genuine warmth that reminded Jack of countless conversations over coffee at her cafe. About damn time, Jack Morrison. As FBI agents approached to escort them for further questioning, Jack felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the lightness that comes with purpose, with truth finally within reach. The Omega Speedmaster had slipped through his fingers, but perhaps it had left him with something more valuable than he'd realized. Sometimes, healing begins with a simple mechanical movement, the steady tick of seconds passing, marking not just time, but the possibility of redemption. The Chicago skyline rose like a mountain range of glass and steel against the pale December sky, impossibly vast after 20 years in Pinewood. Jack Morrison stared out the train window, fingers unconsciously tracing the edge of Senator Blackwood's letter in his pocket. 3 days had passed since the Portland airfield incident. 3 days of FBI debriefings, signed non-disclosure agreements, and carefully worded explanations to Pinewood's sheriff about his vandalized shop. Eleanor sat beside him, reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed a document the FBI had provided details on the government's compensation for damages to their properties and businesses while they were drawn into what was now being called Operation Solar Flare in classified circles. "They're being surprisingly generous," she remarked, turning a page. "Full repairs to your shop, compensation for lost business, even an inconvenience stipend." Jack snorted. "Tax dollars at work. Consider it back pay for 40 years of wrongful termination." Eleanor removed her glasses, studying his profile. "You're nervous." It wasn't a question. Jack didn't bother denying it. "Wouldn't you be 20 years of silence? Then I show up unannounced on my son's doorstep with a declassified government memo and a story about spy watches." "You called ahead," Eleanor reminded him. "He agreed to meet you." "He sounded suspicious," Jack countered. "Like I was trying to sell him something." The train slowed as it approached Union Station, the announcement crackling over the intercom. Eleanor gathered her things, her movements precise and economical habits from her CIA days that would never fade. "Robert is an investigative journalist," she said. "Suspicion is his professional default, but he's still your son." Jack wasn't so sure. The sporadic phone calls over the years had grown increasingly perfunctory, obligatory check-ins at holidays, brief updates about Robert's career or his son Michael's school achievements. The emotional distance had calcified into something that felt permanent, immovable. Yet here he was, stepping onto a Chicago platform with a suitcase containing 3 hastily packed changes of clothes and a government document that might change everything or nothing at all. They took a taxi to the address Robert had provided a brownstone in a gentrifying neighborhood on the north side. Snow dusted the sidewalks, Christmas decorations adorning the neighboring houses with multicolored lights and inflatable Santas. "Nice area," Eleanor observed as they pulled up. "Your son must be doing well." Jack nodded, throat suddenly dry. He paid the driver while Eleanor retrieved their bags from the trunk. Before they could approach the house, the front door opened. Robert Morrison stood on the threshold, a man in his early 40s with Jack's height but his mother's darker coloring. He wore wire-rimmed glasses and a guarded expression, dressed in the business casual of a professional who worked from home. Behind him, a boy of about 12 peered around his father's arm with undisguised curiosity. "Dad," Robert said, the word carrying a weight of history. "Robert," Jack shifted awkwardly, suddenly aware of how he must look an old man with bruised ribs and a still healing cut above his eye. "This is Eleanor Caldwell, my friend from Pinewood." Eleanor extended her hand. "I've heard so much about you." Robert shook it automatically, his gaze still fixed on his father. "You look like hell." "Feel about the same," Jack admitted. The boy nudged his father. "Dad, are you going to make Grandpa stand in the cold all day?" Something in Robert's expression softened. "No, of course not." "Come in, both of you. Michael, help with their bags." The interior of the brownstone was warm and lived-in bookshelves overflowing with volumes on politics and history, framed newspaper clippings alongside family photos, a Christmas tree with handmade ornaments dominating one corner of the living room. A woman emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, pretty, mid-30s, with a welcoming smile that eased some of the tension in Jack's shoulders. "You must be Jack," she said, crossing the room to shake his hand. "I'm Sophia. It's so nice to finally meet you." "Likewise," Jack managed, surprised by her warmth. "And you must be Eleanor," Sophia continued, embracing the older woman as if they were old friends. "Thank you for making the trip with Jack. Please make yourselves comfortable. Dinner's almost ready." Robert watched this exchange with an unreadable expression before gesturing toward the staircase. "I'll show you to the guest rooms. Michael, homework before dinner." The boy groaned but obeyed, pausing to look back at Jack. "Grandpa, is it true you worked on the Apollo missions?" Jack nodded, startled by the direct question. Yes, environmental systems mostly. Michael's eyes widened. Cool. Dad has all your NASA stuff in his office. The medals and everything. Michael, Robert said, a warning in his tone. What you do? The boy disappeared up the stairs, leaving an awkward silence in his wake. Eleanor, ever tactful, turned to Sophia. Can I help with dinner? I own a cafe in Maine. Cooking is my therapy. I'd love the company, Sophia replied, linking arms with Eleanor as if they'd known each other for years rather than minutes. These two probably have a lot to catch up on. Jack watched them retreat to the kitchen, leaving him alone with his son for the first time in over a decade. Robert ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made Jack's chest ache. It was what the boy had always done when nervous, even as a child. You kept the medals, Jack said quietly. Robert shrugged, not meeting his eyes. Mom saved everything. After she died, it seemed wrong to throw them out. He gestured toward a hallway. My office is down here. We should talk before dinner. Jack followed his son into a small room lined with bookshelves. One wall was dedicated to framed articles, Robert's bylines in the Chicago Tribune, and other publications, mostly investigative pieces on corruption and government overreach. A desk held a computer setup more sophisticated than anything in Jack's shop, surrounded by stacks of documents and notebooks. And there, on a shelf behind the desk, was a shadow box containing Jack's NASA service medals, mission patches, and a photograph of a much younger Jack Morrison standing beside a Saturn V rocket, squinting into the Florida sun. You said on the phone this was about a government cover-up, Robert said, closing the door. That you had proof you were wrongfully terminated from NASA? Jack removed the envelope from his pocket. Senator Blackwood provided this. It's only part of the file, but it confirms what I've been saying for 20 years. My safety concerns were valid. The system failures I warned about were real. Robert took the document, scanning it with a journalist's practiced eye. This is heavily redacted. The full file is in Washington. Blackwood says he can arrange access. William Blackwood, the Intelligence Committee chair. Robert looked up sharply. How did you get mixed up with him? Jack sighed, settling into a chair. That's a long story involving a vintage watch, a secret government program called Helios, and a CIA safe house in Maine. Suchkronarton. Robert's eyebrows rose steadily as Jack recounted the events of the past week: the Omega Speedmaster, Harrington's mysterious overpayment, the midnight break-in, Eleanor's revelation about her CIA past, and the confrontation at Portland Executive Airport that ended with Mike Sullivan bleeding out on the terminal floor. When Jack finished, Robert sat in stunned silence, journalist's notebook forgotten in his lap. Jesus Christ, Dad, he finally managed. You're telling me you and the local cafe owner got caught up in a government conspiracy involving solar weapons? That's the simplified version? Yes, Jack gestured to the letter. But the important part is that document. It proves what happened in '72 wasn't my fault. I didn't miss the thermal anomaly readings. I reported them, and those reports were buried. Robert studied his father with new eyes, seeing not just the stubborn old mechanic who'd abandoned the family after his disgrace, but something more complicated. If this is true, it's a major story. Government suppression of safety concerns, retribution against whistleblowers, classified weapons programs disguised as energy research. I didn't come here for a headline, Robert, Jack said quietly. I came because you deserve to know the truth about why I left NASA, why the marriage fell apart. All these years, you thought I was running from responsibility, from failure. But I was running from something worse, the knowledge that 14 people died because no one listened. Robert set the document aside, removing his glasses to rub the bridge of his nose, another gesture inherited from his father. Mom always said there was more to the story than what made the papers. Even after the divorce, even after you went radio silent in Maine, she defended you. Margaret was a good woman, Jack said, throat tight. Better than I deserved. She kept all your letters. You know, the ones you sent the first few years after you left. She'd read them over and over. Robert's voice held a note of accusation. Then you stopped writing altogether. It seemed kinder, Jack admitted. A clean break. Let you both move on without the shadow of my disgrace hanging over you. Kinder to whom, exactly? Robert asked sharply. Not to Mom, who spent years wondering what she could have done differently. Not to me, growing up with a father who appeared once a year like some reluctant ghost at Christmas. The words landed like physical blows. Jack accepted them without protest, knowing they were deserved. You're right. I thought I was protecting you both, but I was protecting myself from facing what I'd lost, what I couldn't fix. Robert sighed, the anger seeming to drain out of him. And now what do you want now, Dad? A chance, Jack said simply. Not to undo the past that's impossible, but maybe to build something new. To know my grandson beyond the school photos you send at Christmas. To explain to him someday that his grandfather wasn't a failure or a quitter. That I stood by what was right, even when it cost me everything. Before Robert could respond, a knock came at the door. Eleanor poked her head in, her expression carefully neutral. Dinner's ready, gentlemen. Sophia says to come while it's hot. Dinner was a strange affair. Moments of tension punctuated by Michael's endless questions about NASA and space travel. The boy was clearly fascinated by his grandfather's past, hanging on Jack's every word about Apollo-era technology and mission protocols. Sophia proved to be a skilled mediator, steering the conversation away from sensitive topics whenever Robert's expression darkened. Eleanor, for her part, charmed them all with stories of Pinewood's eccentric residents and the challenges of running a cafe in a town where everyone knew everyone's business. By dessert, a spectacular apple pie that Eleanor and Sophia had prepared together, the atmosphere had warmed considerably. So what happens now? Sophia asked as she served coffee. With the investigation into this Helios program, Jack deferred to Eleanor, who had better connections to the ongoing proceedings. Senator Blackwood is leading a closed-door inquiry, she explained. Energy Secretary Harrison has been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome. The official story is irregularities in departmental appropriations, but behind the scenes, it's much bigger. And the people who tried to kill you, Michael asked, eyes wide. Michael, Sophia admonished, that's not dinner conversation. But Grandpa was in a shootout with secret agents. That's awesome. Jack couldn't help but smile at his grandson's enthusiasm, though the memory of Mike Sullivan's death was far from awesome. I was mostly hiding behind FBI agents. Kiddo, not exactly James Bond material. Still cool, Michael insisted. None of my friends' grandpas have government conspiracies. And let's keep it that way, Robert interjected firmly. Much of what Dad and Eleanor have shared is still classified. It doesn't leave this house. Understood. Michael nodded solemnly, though the gleam in his eye suggested Jack's stock had risen considerably in his estimation. Later, after Michael had gone to bed and Sophia had tactfully retreated to give father and son privacy, Jack and Robert sat in the living room with glasses of bourbon. Eleanor had excused herself as well, claiming fatigue from the journey, though Jack suspected she was deliberately giving them space to reconnect. Michael's a great kid, Jack said, watching the ice melt in his glass. Smart, curious. Too curious sometimes, Robert replied, but there was pride in his voice. He gets that from both sides of the family. Mom was always asking questions too. The mention of Margaret created a moment of shared remembrance. She had died 5 years earlier. Cancer, swift and merciless. Jack had attended the funeral, standing at the back of the church, exchanging only brief, formal words with his son before retreating to Maine. I should have been there more, Jack said, the bourbon loosening his tongue. For both of you, after she got sick, she understood why you weren't, Robert said, surprising him. More than I did, honestly. She always said you were a good man trapped in a bad situation. He swirled his drink thoughtfully. I didn't believe her for a long time. Easier to think you were just selfish, or broken, or whatever. Easier than admitting the world could be that unfair to someone who did the right thing? Jack absorbed this, feeling a knot in his chest begin to unravel slowly, painfully, but undeniably. Your mother was wiser than both of us. She was, Robert agreed. She'd be pleased to see you here. You know, she always hoped we'd find our way back to some kind of relationship. And you, Jack asked, the question he'd been avoiding all evening. What do you hope for? Robert set his glass down, considering his answer carefully. I think I'd like to know my father. The real one. Not the bitter man who visited once a year with forced smiles and awkward silences. Not the NASA engineer in the old photographs, either. He met Jack's gaze directly. Just you, whoever that is now. It was more than Jack had dared to hope for. This tentative opening, not forgiveness exactly, but the possibility of it. A door left ajar rather than locked tight. I'd like that, he said simply. The next morning brought clearer skies and a sense of cautious optimism. Jack awoke early, decades of pre-dawn rising ingrained too deeply to break even on vacation. He made his way quietly downstairs, surprised to find Sophia already in the kitchen, preparing coffee. Early riser too, she asked, offering him a mug. Old habits, Jack confirmed, accepting gratefully. Hope I didn't wake you. Not at all. I have an early surgery. At his questioning look, she explained. I'm a pediatric surgeon at Northwestern Memorial. Today's a routine procedure, but I like to review everything beforehand. Jack nodded, impressed. Robert did well for himself, Sophia smiled. We did well for each other. She hesitated and then added, he talks about you, not often, but when he does, it's clear there's a lot of unresolved admiration there, beneath the hurt. Admiration? Jack couldn't keep the surprise from his voice. You stood by your principles, even when it cost you everything. That matters to Robert. It's what drives his journalism exposing corruption, standing up for what's right. She refilled his mug. The apple didn't fall far from the tree, even if neither of you can see it. Before Jack could respond, the doorbell rang, an unexpected sound, at 6:30 a.m. Sophia frowned, setting down the coffee pot. I'll get it, Jack offered, already moving toward the door. Through the frosted glass, he could make out the silhouette of a woman professional posture, alone. Probably not a threat, but after the events of the past week, Jack had learned to be cautious. He opened the door partway, keeping his body positioned to block entry if necessary. Agent Catherine Reynolds stood on the doorstep, her breath forming clouds in the December air. She wore a dark overcoat and carried a slim briefcase, her expression grave. Mr. Morrison, she said by way of greeting. May I come in? We have a situation developing. Jack glanced back at Sophia, who had appeared in the hallway behind him. It's okay, he assured her. FBI agent from Portland. Reynolds stepped inside and nodding to Sophia. Dr. Chen, I presume I apologize for the early hour, but this couldn't wait. I'll wake Eleanor, Jack said, sensing the urgency behind Reynolds' professional demeanor. Within minutes, the four of them were seated in Robert's office. Jack, Eleanor, Reynolds, and Robert himself, summoned from the shower with dripping hair and an expression that shifted from annoyance to intense interest as Reynolds explained her presence. The microdot has been located, she said without preamble. The real one, with Blackwood's evidence against Harrison and the Helios program. Eleanor leaned forward. Where? In an Omega Speedmaster watch identical to the one Mr. Morrison sold to Harrington. It was delivered anonymously to Senator Blackwood's office yesterday. Reynolds opened her briefcase, removing a small evidence bag containing a familiar timepiece. This watch, Jack stared at it, a perfect twin to the one he'd briefly owned. I don't understand. If Blackwood had the evidence all along, he didn't, Reynolds interrupted. According to his statement, he hid the microdot in a watch, but it was stolen from his home 2 weeks ago. He created the legend about the Pembroke estate auction as disinformation. never expecting it to intersect with a real Omega Speedmaster that happened to be in private hands. Mine, Jack said, the coincidence still difficult to accept. Exactly. When Harrison's people traced the auction legend to your purchase, they assumed your watch was the one they sought. Reynolds' expression turned grim. But now we have a new problem. The microdot contains more than just evidence against Harrison. It includes the actual security codes for the Helios platform codes that would allow someone to activate the system remotely. Robert whistled softly. That's why Harrison was so desperate to recover it. Yes, and now we have intelligence suggesting Harrison wasn't acting alone. He was part of a private consortium with military and corporate connections, people who still want Helios operational. Reynolds turned to Eleanor. That's why I'm here. The FBI director asked specifically for your assistance. Ms. Caldwell, your experience with the original Helios program makes you uniquely qualified. Eleanor looked startled. I was junior staff, barely involved. But you recognize the operational signatures. You identified Sullivan based on tactics alone. Reynolds leaned forward. We need your help identifying the other players before they make another attempt to access Helios. Jack felt a familiar sense of dread settling in his stomach. Why come to Chicago? Why involve my family at all? Reynolds' expression softened slightly. Because one of the names that appeared in Blackwood's evidence is connected to your past. Mr. Morrison, someone you might be able to help us locate. She removed a photograph from her briefcase, sliding it across the desk. Dr. Alvin Mercer, chief scientist on the original Helios program and, according to our records, your direct supervisor at NASA in 1972. Jack stared at the photograph, an elderly man with hawkish features and calculating eyes. The face was older, but unmistakable. Mercer, he breathed. They told me he died years ago. Evidently not, Reynolds said dryly. He's been living under an assumed identity, consulting for private aerospace companies. We believe he's the technical architect behind the Helios revival. Robert studied the photograph. Journalist's instincts engaged. You think my father knows where to find him after 50 years? Not directly, Reynolds clarified. But Dr. Mercer appears to be reaching out to former colleagues from the original program. 3 days ago, this arrived at Mr. Morrison's shop in Pinewood. She produced another evidence bag containing a postcard, a vintage NASA image of the Apollo 15 mission. On the back, a single line of text. The eagle still flies at midnight. Remember our promise. Jack's blood ran cold. That was a phrase Mercer used during the congressional hearings, when he pulled me aside afterward and said someday the truth would come out. We believe it's a contact attempt, Reynolds confirmed. Possibly a request for assistance or a warning. Either way, Dr. Mercer is trying to communicate with you specifically, which gives us an opportunity to locate him. Eleanor's expression had grown increasingly troubled. You want to use Jack as bait? As an asset, Reynolds corrected. With proper safeguards and protection. Absolutely not, Robert interjected, protective instinct flaring. My father's already been manipulated enough by people from his past. He's not getting involved in another government operation. Jack held up a hand, silencing his son's protest. What exactly would I need to do? Reynolds outlined the plan, a controlled response to Mercer's overture, drawing him into communication while FBI surveillance tracked him to his location. Jack would be under constant protection, his communications monitored and secured. The operation would last no more than 72 hours. And if we locate Mercer, Jack asked, we bring him in for questioning regarding his role in the Helios program and the current conspiracy. Reynolds' tone was carefully neutral. His cooperation could be beneficial to his legal situation. Robert paced the small office, agitation evident in every movement. This is insane. You're asking my father, a civilian with no training, to help capture a potentially dangerous fugitive. I'm asking him to help prevent a weapon of mass destruction from falling into the wrong hands, Reynolds countered. Dr. Mercer reached out to your father for a reason. He trusts him, or believes he will be sympathetic. That's an advantage we can't replicate. Eleanor, who had remained silent during the exchange, finally spoke. I'll help, but only if Jack is never alone during this operation. I want to be present for every communication, every meeting. Reynolds nodded. That's acceptable. Your CIA experience is an asset. All eyes turned to Jack, who sat contemplating the postcard with its cryptic message. Mercer had been the one who'd recommended his termination, who'd testified that Jack had missed critical warning signs before the accident, but Mercer had also whispered that apology afterward, had promised that someday the truth would emerge. Perhaps this was that someday. I'll do it, Jack decided, ignoring Robert's sound of protest. But I have conditions. My family stays completely out of it. You relocate Robert, Sophia, and Michael to a secure location until it's over. And afterward, I get the complete, unredacted file on what happened in 1972, everything Blackwood promised. Reynolds considered this, then nodded. Agreed. We can move your family to a secure location within the hour. As for the file, I'll need to get approval, but I believe Senator Blackwood can facilitate that request. Robert looked between them, frustration evident. Don't I get a say in this? You get to keep your family safe, Jack said firmly. That's non-negotiable. A tense silence fell over the room, broken only when the door creaked open and Michael poked his head in, already dressed for school. Dad, is everything okay? Robert's expression softened immediately. Everything's fine, buddy, but we're going to take a little unexpected trip today. How do you feel about missing school for a few days? Michael's eyes widened, taking in the serious faces and the FBI agent in their home office. Is this about Grandpa's spy stuff? Despite the gravity of the situation, Jack couldn't suppress a small smile. Something like that, kiddo. Your dad will explain everything, but right now, you need to pack a bag. Just essentials. As Michael scampered off, excited by the adventure of it all, Robert turned back to his father. I don't like this. Any of it. I know, Jack acknowledged. But sometimes we do difficult things because they're necessary, not because we like them. He met his son's gaze directly. I didn't come back into your life just to disappear again. Robert, I promise you that. This is about finishing something that started 50 years ago, so we can all move forward. Robert studied his father's face, searching for something. Whatever he found there must have provided some reassurance, because he nodded reluctantly. 3 days, that's it. Then we revisit this entire situation. Agreed, Jack said, relieved. As Reynolds made arrangements for the family's relocation, and Eleanor began reviewing the operational details, Jack found himself contemplating the strange circularity of his situation. The Omega Speedmaster had brought his past crashing into his present, forcing him to confront decades of regret and isolation. Now, that same watch, or rather, its twin, was offering him a chance at resolution, at finally understanding the full truth of what had happened at NASA all those years ago. Perhaps Eleanor had been right that first night in her cabin. Sometimes the watch is the key not just to a government conspiracy, but to unlocking the prison of one's own making. Within hours, Robert's family had been evacuated to a secure FBI facility, with promises of regular updates and a timeline for reunion. Jack, Eleanor, and Reynolds established their base of operations in a nondescript hotel suite in downtown Chicago, equipped with surveillance technology and secure communications. We need to craft a response that will draw Mercer out without alerting him to our involvement, Reynolds explained, setting up a laptop. Something that would seem natural coming from you, Mr. Morrison. Jack thought about the man he'd known 50 years ago, brilliant, driven, but always with an undercurrent of something that, in retrospect, might have been guilt. Mercer was obsessed with legacy, he said slowly, with how history would remember the Apollo program and his contributions to it. That's what our promise refers to. I think his assurance that history would eventually vindicate both of us. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. So we appeal to that desire for historical accuracy, for setting the record straight? Exactly. Jack dictated a message to be placed in the classified section of several major newspapers, the kind of old-school communication that someone of Mercer's generation might expect the Eagle remembers. Time to correct the flight log. Same coordinates as Houston debrief. Houston debrief, Reynolds questioned. After the congressional hearings, we met at a small diner near Johnson Space Center, Jack explained. It's long gone now, but the location would be meaningful to him. Reynolds nodded, typing rapidly. We'll have surveillance in place within the hour. If he shows, we'll be ready. The waiting was excruciating. Jack paced the hotel suite, checking his watch compulsively, not the Omega Speedmaster that had started this journey, but his simple Timex that had faithfully kept time for decades. Eleanor monitored communications while Reynolds coordinated with field agents, the tension in the room building with each passing hour. By nightfall, there had been no response. Jack slept fitfully, dreams filled with rocket launches and congressional hearings, and the face of a man who had destroyed his career with a few carefully chosen lies. Morning brought coffee, stale pastries from the hotel lobby, and continued silence from Mercer. Jack was beginning to think they'd misinterpreted the message entirely when Reynolds' secure phone rang. Yes, she answered, listening intently. When are you certain keep visual contact but maintain distance? We're on our way. She hung up, turning to Jack and Eleanor with renewed energy. We have a hit. An elderly man matching Mercer's description was observed examining the newspaper at a cafe near the old Johnson Space Center location. He's currently seated at an outdoor table, apparently waiting. Jack felt his pulse quicken. He came. He did, Reynolds confirmed. Now we need to approach carefully. The location is public, which limits our options for apprehension. We'll need to make contact, establish rapport, and then guide him to a more controlled environment. I'll go, Jack said immediately. Alone? Absolutely not. Eleanor and Reynolds responded in unison. He won't talk if he senses a trap, Jack argued. I know Mercer. He's paranoid, meticulous. If he sees anyone but me, he'll disappear again. Reynolds frowned. We can't send you in without backup. Then make it discreet. Eleanor can observe from a distance. Your agents can cover the exits. Jack leaned forward, conviction in his voice. This might be our only chance to find out what Mercer knows about Helios, about Harrison's consortium. We can't risk spooking him. After lengthy debate and multiple security precautions, they reached a compromise. Jack would make initial contact alone, wearing a concealed microphone. Eleanor would position herself nearby as immediate backup, with FBI agents covering all exit points from a distance. The cafe was a modern chain establishment, nothing like the Greasy Spoon where Jack and Mercer had met half a century earlier. Yet the location was the same a corner that had once witnessed two NASA employees having a conversation that would haunt Jack for decades. Alvin Mercer sat at an outdoor table, despite the December chill, wrapped in a heavy overcoat, a newspaper spread before him. At 85, he was more frail than Jack remembered, his once imposing frame diminished by age. But his eyes, when they locked onto Jack approaching from the sidewalk, were still sharp with intelligence and calculation. Morrison, he said, voice wavering slightly. You came. Jack settled into the chair opposite him, studying the face of the man who had orchestrated his professional destruction. Your postcard was hard to ignore. Alvin, Mercer smiled thinly. Still direct? Good. We don't have much time. He folded the newspaper with arthritic fingers. I assume you're wearing a wire and there are federal agents watching us right now? Jack didn't deny it. You're a wanted man. Alvin, did you expect me to come alone? No, but I hoped you might listen before they take me in. Mercer leaned forward, lowering his voice. Helios was never meant to be a weapon. Jack, that was Harrison's perversion of my work. I designed it as a shield, a way to redirect solar energy to protect Earth from coronal mass ejections, from catastrophic space weather. Yet you helped Harrison revive it, Jack pointed out. Why, because the threat is real, Mercer insisted. A sufficiently powerful solar event could destroy our electrical grid, send us back to the Dark Ages. Helios could prevent that could save millions of lives. His expression darkened. But Harrison and his consortium saw its offensive capabilities. They wanted a weapon they could aim, not a shield to protect. Jack absorbed this, aware of Reynolds and Eleanor listening through his concealed earpiece. And the evidence Blackwood gathered? The microdot in the watch. Insurance, Mercer said simply. I helped Blackwood compile it when I realized what Harrison intended. The security codes, the technical specifications, everything needed to shut Helios down permanently. Then why run? Why not stay and testify against Harrison? Mercer's gaze dropped to the table. Because I'm still responsible for what happened in 1972. For what happened to you. He looked up, eyes haunted with decades of regret. They threatened my family. Jack. Said they'd ensure my daughter never worked in academia again. That my grandchildren would suffer if I didn't testify against you. I was a coward. I sacrificed your career to protect my family. The admission hung in the air between them. The truth Jack had suspected but never confirmed. Strangely, after all these years, the confirmation brought more relief than anger. Who threatened you? Alvin. Who was behind it? The same consortium that's behind Helios now. Different faces. Same organization. People who believe national security justifies any action, any sacrifice. Mercer reached into his coat, movements deliberately slow. I brought you something. Proof. Jack tensed, but Mercer withdrew only a small USB drive. Everything I know about the consortium, names, dates, connections, 50 years of their operations, including who ordered the suppression of your safety concerns and why. He slid it across the table. It won't give you back your career, but maybe it will give you peace. Jack stared at the small device, hardly daring to believe it contained the answers he'd sought for half his life. Why now, Alvin, after all this time? Mercer smiled sadly. I'm dying, Jack. Pancreatic cancer. 6 months, maybe less. I want to set things right before I go. He glanced around, suddenly alert. Your FBI friends are closing in. Before they take me, you should know there's a fail-safe in the Helios system, a back door I built that only I can access. That's why Harrison's people haven't made another attempt yet. They need me. Then help us stop them, Jack urged. Testify against the consortium. Use your back door to ensure Helios can never be weaponized. That's the plan, Mercer agreed. But I needed to see you first, to apologize, to give you that, he nodded toward the USB drive, and to ask for your forgiveness, though I don't deserve it. Before Jack could respond, Reynolds appeared at their table, badge displayed. Dr. Alvin Mercer, I'm Special Agent Catherine Reynolds with the FBI. I need you to come with me. Mercer nodded, unsurprised. He stood shakily, leaning on a cane Jack hadn't noticed before. I've been expecting you. Agent Reynolds. I'll cooperate fully. As FBI agents escorted Mercer to a waiting vehicle, Eleanor joined Jack at the table. Did you get what you needed? She asked quietly. Jack stared at the USB drive in his hand, containing 5 decades of secrets and, hopefully, the truth he'd been denied for so long. I think so, he said, or at least a start. The aftermath unfolded with surprising swiftness. Mercer's testimony, combined with the evidence from Blackwood's microdot and the information on the USB drive, provided federal prosecutors with an airtight case against Secretary Harrison and several high-ranking members of the consortium. The Helios program was permanently decommissioned, its technology repurposed for legitimate space weather monitoring under international oversight. 3 days after the cafe meeting, as promised, Jack was reunited with Robert's family at the FBI's Chicago field office. Michael greeted him with a hero's welcome, having decided his grandfather was officially the coolest ever. Sophia embraced him warmly, whispering thanks for keeping them safe. And Robert approached with something new in his expression, a respect that transcended the tentative reconnection of their earlier reunion. "Dad," he said simply, pulling Jack into a hug that conveyed everything words could not. Later, as they prepared to return to the brownstone, Reynolds approached with a thick manila envelope. "As promised, Mr. Morrison, the complete unredacted file on the 1972 incident and your subsequent termination. Senator Blackwood had it declassified personally." Jack accepted the envelope with a sense of unreality. After decades of fighting for the truth, of being denied and dismissed, it felt strange to finally hold it in his hands. "Thank you." "No, thank you," Reynolds replied sincerely. "Your cooperation helped prevent a significant threat to national security. The director asked me to convey his personal gratitude." As the FBI agents departed and normalcy began to reassert itself, Jack found himself in Robert's office once more. The file opened before him, its contents finally revealing the full story of what had happened all those years ago. Robert sat beside him, journalist's notebook at the ready, recording the historical record his father had been denied for so long. "They knew," Jack said, voice tight with emotion as he read. "They knew about the thermal anomalies 6 months before the accident. Multiple engineers reported them. Not just me." Robert made notes, his expression grim. "And they buried all of it to protect the program's funding. And when it finally failed, exactly as predicted." Jack shook his head, still processing the magnitude of the deception. "They needed a scapegoat, someone whose reputation they could sacrifice to avoid a full congressional investigation that might have exposed their other projects." "Like Helios," Robert supplied. "Like Helios," Jack confirmed. They worked through the file methodically, father and son piecing together the truth that had been fragmented and hidden for half a century. It was cathartic, painful, but ultimately healing. The engineer and the journalist united in their commitment to facts, to accountability. When they finished, Robert closed his notebook and studied his father with new understanding. "You know, all these years, I thought you left because you couldn't face failure, because your pride couldn't handle being wrong. And now," Jack asked quietly, "now I understand you left because you couldn't face being right, knowing that your warnings could have saved lives if anyone had listened?" Robert's expression softened. "That's a different kind of burden altogether." Jack nodded, grateful for his son's perception. "I couldn't stay in that world, knowing what I knew. Couldn't keep working in a system that valued politics over safety, bureaucracy over human lives. So you fixed engines in Maine instead," Robert said, not unkindly. "Found a place where mechanical problems had straightforward solutions, where the truth wasn't negotiable." "Something like that," Jack admitted, "though I missed a lot by hiding away." "Sikri." Robert was silent for a moment, then said, "You know, Michael's science fair is next month. He's building a model of the Apollo command module. Could use some expert advice." The invitation was clear, bridge building in its simplest form. Jack smiled, feeling something long knotted in his chest begin to unravel. "I'd like that. And maybe for Christmas, you could stay with us. No frozen dinners in Maine this year." "I'd like that too," Jack said, surprised by the emotion thickening his voice. "Very much." The future stretched before them, not erasing the decades of estrangement, but offering something new in their place, a relationship built on truth finally revealed, on understanding hard-won. The Omega Speedmaster that had started this journey was now evidence in a federal investigation, but its impact would resonate through generations of Morrisons. Sometimes, Jack reflected, time's greatest gift isn't in the hours it measures, but in the healing it eventually allows, if only we're brave enough to face it. Epilogue. 6 months later, the summer sun warmed the Chicago lakefront as Jack stood at the railing, watching sailboats slice through the blue waters of Lake Michigan. Beside him, Eleanor sipped iced tea, her silver hair catching the light. "How long can you stay this time?" she asked. 3 weeks, Jack replied. Robert and Sophia are taking Michael to space camp in Huntsville next month. Asked if I'd come along as the resident expert. Eleanor smiled. Quite the change from last Christmas. Quite the change from the last 20 years, Jack acknowledged. Much had changed indeed. After the Helios investigation concluded, Jack had split his time between Pinewood and Chicago, gradually rebuilding his relationship with Robert and forming a new one with Michael. Eleanor had sold her cafe to her longtime assistant and now divided her time between her main cabin and a small apartment near Jack's shop. They had become something, not quite a couple in the traditional sense, but companions with a shared understanding of both darkness and light. The events surrounding the Omega Speedmaster had forged a bond that transcended friendship. Mercer's testimony concluded yesterday, Eleanor noted. Final sentencing for Harrison is next week. Jack nodded. Alvin Mercer, despite his terminal diagnosis, had provided exhaustive evidence against the consortium, ensuring Harrison and his co-conspirators received substantial prison terms. The old scientist had made his peace with Jack, and in doing so, had begun to make peace with himself. Robert's article series was nominated for a Pulitzer, Jack said with quiet pride. Shadows of Apollo, the untold story of NASA's darkest hour, even used some of my old technical notes. The truth finally told, Eleanor mused. After all these years, most of it, anyway. Jack turned from the railing, facing the lake breeze. There are still classified elements they wouldn't let him publish. There always are. Eleanor set her glass down on a nearby bench. Does that bother you that some secrets remain buried? Jack considered the question, thinking of the complete story. He now possessed the names, the decisions, the calculated risks that had cost lives and careers. Not anymore, he decided. I know what happened. Robert knows. The people responsible have been held accountable. That's enough. Eleanor nodded, understanding. And Pinewood, will you keep the shop for now? Though I'm thinking of taking on an apprentice. Can't fix engines forever. No, Eleanor agreed, slipping her hand into his. But some things can be rebuilt, even after decades of neglect. She wasn't talking about engines anymore. Jack squeezed her hand gently, acknowledging the deeper truth in her words. They stood together, watching the sailboats, two people who had weathered storms, both literal and figurative. In Jack's pocket, a small box contained a gift for Michael's upcoming birthday, a vintage Omega Speedmaster, carefully authenticated, its mechanical heart ticking with precise, reliable rhythm. Not the watch that had started their journey, but one that would carry its legacy forward. A reminder that time moves in only one direction, but it's never too late to change its course. The lake shimmered in the summer light, so different from the frozen isolation Jack Morrison had chosen for 20 years. Sailboats traced white paths across blue water, each one charting its own course, just as he had finally found his. What began with a vintage watch and $15,000 had ended with truth unearthed, wrongs acknowledged, and a family slowly healing. Some prices can never be repaid. 14 lives lost to negligence. Decades of estrangement from a son who grew up without a father. The quiet dignity of a wife who understood more than she ever revealed. But sometimes redemption arrives in unexpected forms. A grandson's admiring eyes. A declassified file revealing vindication too long delayed. A hand slipped trustingly into his own. The Omega Speedmaster now resting in his pocket wasn't the one that started this journey. That timepiece had served its purpose, carrying secrets within its mechanical heart that changed the course of lives and perhaps saved countless more. But this watch would mark different hours, birthdays, holidays, quiet moments of connection once thought impossible. Time moves in only one direction. We cannot recover the years lost to silence, to pride, to fear. But perhaps the true measure of a life isn't found in the hours we've spent, but in how we choose to spend those that remain, and whether, when darkness falls, we've found our way home.